Today is another day for our tour in Ghana. Today we are in Prampram. That is one of the areas in the Greater Accra region, and today we are visiting a place called the African Ancestral Wall, where the story of some of the great leaders and achievers of Africa are showcased. So we're going to see their picture, and then we also going to listen to the history behind what they did. To do this with me is my very good friend here, who is going to introduce himself. He is the originator of all these great ideas. So, hello, sir.
Hello. Okay, I'm Jerry Johnson. I came here from Los Angeles, California about 17 years ago or so, almost 18 now, I think. And the African Ancestral Wall was actually an idea that came out of being around Ghana, not really being happy about some of the African history or the lack of African history that I saw in the schools. I have 2 children here myself coming up, so after trying to do some history inside the schools, I decided that since I had this space, it would be easier for me to bring the children on excursion, or what they call field trips, and that way I would have the children's undivided attention, and then also the motivation that comes along with children getting in a bus, going on excursion. The headmasters and teachers and things will also help them to focus. So I found that to be very fruitful and more effective. So that's why we built the African Ancestral Wall. We've had hundreds or maybe thousands, I don't know, children come through here. Slowed down a little by COVID, but we're back on track, I think. And of course, we've been having our annual programs showcasing how brilliant our children are, especially when they learn their history and take on the characters of some of the ancestors in history. So that is the thrust of what we're doing. It's always free of charge to anyone who feels like coming, and it will always be that way. And so this is where we are.
Hey, you just heard Mr. Jerry give you a brief introduction, and he's going to take us on a tour and give us all the story we need to hear about this. But this is a place that you will love to bring your children here to learn, because it is when we learn about our history that we really discover who we are and the potential in us. So let's go and start the tour.
So we have a lot of figures on the wall. We'll go through them at a moderate pace here. And hopefully you'll see some that really resonate with you. A few things that I have to say in the beginning that I forgot to say is that the way I chose the people who are going on the wall here was basically what attributes they had that I wanted the children to internalize and to appreciate, and maybe one day to emulate. And the next thing, I had 8 different artists, so you'll see different kinds of styles, and that's why you'll see different styles, and that's the main things. So you'll see as we go along some of these different types of attributes that I talked about. So let me start here with Apoko Kanyani. My wife and children are raised in the tradition of the Frafra Bruni people. Apoko Kanyani was one of the great ladies or people who were there during the slavery times. The story basically was, okay, the story basically was that when the slavers came, they were looking for men, and they were looking to pull people together. And the men had disappeared to be ready to, come back and fight another day. She ended up using her pestle to crack the head of the main slave trader as he turned his head. Well, he died while he was there. And the rumor, not the rumor, but the reputation that her and the others in the area gained is that this is not a good place to come for slaves.
Wow.
And so now they have a saying, if my children were here, they would say it in the native language. It just talks about the pestle turned to blood. And that's the legend of Opoku Kanyani, who's still a hero today in the northern part of Ghana. Okay. Here we have Queen T of ancient Kemet. This is the time that I really let the children know about ancient Egypt being a black African civilization. So I discussed Queen T, who was one of their great queens and also married to Amenhotep III. Queen T, not only was she influential and beautiful, but she really captured the essence of the female balance, male-female balance in terms of power in the Nile Valley civilizations in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. Okay, Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey, if you notice when you come in, he's the first one looking at you. In this picture, I say that no matter where you're moving along this wall, his eyes are always on you. And that's because I think he knows what needs to be done. But anyway, Marcus Garvey had the biggest black organization in the history of the world, some 5-6 million people. That was the Universal Negro Improvement Association. I mentioned earlier Up You Mighty Race, because he was one who could see the potential and the possibilities of what we could have as power as a people if we took advantage of what God gave us. Kwame Nkrumah, of course, I don't usually have to say too much about him to the students here, because this is one figure they know, of course, being the founder of modern Ghana, post-colonial Ghana. But I do like to make one observation that I think helps a little bit, and it's a quote by Nkrumah, who says that he read Hegel, Marx, Engels, and Lenin, and all of these big brain Europeans that were taught to study, but the one that had the most influence on him was reading the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey. And so that gives the students and the people some context of what kind of man Garvey was in terms of being able to impact someone as powerful and as brilliant as a Kwame Nkrumah. Jonas Karbu, Tejangma, these are the founders of New Ningo. I like to make sure that the children here, even if they're not from this area, know who the people are who started Karbu Kope, or what we now call New Ningo. Okay, this is one of the more controversial figures. And then when we start going down the wall, I call it Eve, mother of humanity. And the reason I have that name Eve is because the people are already familiar with an Adam and an Eve. But I like to let them know that our species, which is Homo sapiens sapiens, started some 200,000 years ago on the African continent, and about 70,000 years ago, they began to migrate out to populate the rest of the world. So what that means, for something on the order of 130,000 years, there were no humans on the planet who are not on the African continent. And so once the children began to understand that, they began to know that if you are among the parents of humanity, there's no way that you should be in a situation where other humanity is in a, say, dominant position over you. And they're also about the potential, not only of yourself, but of the human race in general. Chinua Achebe, to keep moving, is a great author there from Nigeria. A lot of people have read Things Fall Apart, which is required reading in a lot of places when you're going through
it's
all
a
around the
literature
world.
book for us when we're in school.
And it's a very good book, but there's a lot of other ones. Anthills of the Savannah, Man of the People. There's a lot of books that he's read. An Igbo man from the southern part of Nigeria. Asa Hilliard, when I was coming up, about 19, 20 years old, we were told by Asa Hilliard about these African civilizations, origin of African civilizations. He was a psychologist by training, but also a historian, Egyptologist, and just an all-around powerful, influential, and giving, caring, kind African man. As you can see, he was also installed in Ghana, which is why I put Ghana there.
He's schooled in Ghana?
Installed in the
okay.
Central region. Yeah.
Okay.
Ya Santewa, the great Queen Mother of Ejisu. I think a lot of people here in Ghana are familiar with her, but I like to sometimes allow them to give the presentation where she implores the men to continue fighting, you know, the Ashanti men when they were in the clutches of British colonialism, trying to fight their way out. So the great Queen Mother fighter. Dead on Kumasi. Here in Ghana, a lot of people have heard the name Kumasi because that's Jerry Rawlings' son.
Yeah.
His name Kumasi, but this is the one he named him for. He was a freedom fighter, what today we would have to call guerrilla warfare, since he was, of course, outmanned and outgunned by the British, had to go to the mountains and hills of Kenya to lead what they call the Kenya or Kikuyu Land Freedom Army against the British. They finally captured him, and if you look at this picture, he was captured in this picture, but he still had the defiance of the kind of men that I think Jerry Rawlings had in mind when he named his son. Nzinga Mbandi of Angola. So we're going back now around 500 years ago to the old slave trade. In this case, the Portuguese doing what they do in terms of conquering parts of Africa for enslavement, for taking people out. And Nzinga fought that. She used diplomacy, she used alliances, and every means at her disposal to try not to let her empire and the Africans in it become depleted, dominated, and destroyed. She fought to late in her life to that end. Sergeant Cornelius Ajete, most Ghanaians should know him.
Yeah.
He was one of the 3 soldiers who were shot and killed. Basically, they were marching on the castle there in Christiansburg because they had fought along with the other West African regiments against, on the side of the British and that side during World War II. They distinguished themselves in Burma, fighting against the Japanese. When they finally got back and the war was won, the things that were promised to them were denied, and the men marched on the castle. Major Imre, which was a British major, ended up shooting and killing him and 2 others. This is really what sparked the Accra riots, and so you hear about the imprisonment, the Big Six and all of that. But it was the courage of these men and the people with them that really was the impetus for breaking the colonial grip. Maurice Bishop from Grenada. A lot of people have not heard of Grenada. Small island in the Caribbean. Maurice Bishop led something called the New Jewel Movement. This was these young, well, let me say something else. This is also a time when I let the children understand why there are so many Africans in the Western Hemisphere, in these small islands in Jamaica and San Lucia, Trinidad and Cuba. They were brought there from Africa during the slave trade time. So this is important for them to even know what these black people are doing in the Western Hemisphere, because believe it or not, a lot of them have no idea of that. So back to Maurice Bishop, we talk about the things he did to reduce poverty, to increase literacy, healthcare, all of the things. Unfortunately, the revolution they put in place with only 100,000 people in the country was crushed in 1983 by the U.S. government, who, under the pretext of them building an international capacity for Soviets to land their planes and all of the rest of that. But really they were crushing them because this was an example of a black country, small black country that was going it alone and becoming free and independent. Amazon or Nomaton warriors, Dahomey. If you read some of the writings of even the French Legion who were fighting during the colonial times, they'll tell you about these women being strong freedom fighters with Behanzin against the French, of course. I think I just mentioned that. So these women trained originally as security and then eventually got to become a strong fighting force of their own, known throughout West Africa as some of the strongest fighters we've seen. Edward Wilmot Blyden of St. Thomas. St. Thomas is another small Caribbean island in the Virgin Islands. Dessalines of Haiti. This is the #1 lieutenant of Toussaint Louverture, which we'll talk a little bit more about. You know, the Haitians had to fight for their freedom against Napoleon's army. And I always say that the Ghanaians do us a favor in terms of their educational systems, because a lot of times they will have heard of Napoleon, the great French general who was supposed to be the most dominant military man of the day. And then I can explain to them with Dessalines and Toussaint Louverture and the Haitians were able to sack his army, kick them out of Haiti. At that time, they had named it the Saint-Domingue. That's what the French had called it. But when they took over, kicked them out, and by the way, they also had to kick out the British army who came in after them, and renamed it Haiti. The name Haiti comes from the Native Americans who were there before the French or the Africans or anyone else. They called the place Haiti. So they had the good sense and good manners to give the name back, even though so many of the original people had been eliminated. So Dessalines is famous there for also being very hardcore and strict with the French in terms of making sure they were out of power and out of the system.
So which means in Haiti they also have Native Americans.
Well, they were Native Americans
living there.
Well, Native Islanders, I don't know if you call it American, but all of the Caribbean islands, of course, had natives before the Americans or the Africans, but most of them have been killed. So right there where you are in Ohio, you could probably look around Ohio and hear all of these kind of names. These are Native American names, even though the people are gone. And now it's all European, whites and African, everybody else, but the original people mainly are wiped out. At that time, there was some still there. But what he said is, look, I'm at least giving you the name back that you had before these people came and conquered you. Yeah, that's Dessalines. George Washington Carver, easily the #1 agricultural genius of the day during his reign. Fortunately for us, he spent most of his time at Tuskegee Institute, all-black institute there in the U.S. If you ever get a chance, I tell people, go to Tuskegee and see what he was able to do with crop rotation, soybeans, peanuts, sweet potatoes. I mean, it's really unbelievable. And so the Europeans, Americans, white Americans of the day were asking him, what is it? How do you know so much about all of this? Because Iowa and all these other big colleges tried to recruit him. He said, no, he won't come. They want to know, how did he have this insight into plants, into these things, and what they would do and what to put together, how they would grow and not grow. He says, how do you know so much about plants? Because they're trying to get his secrets. And he says, I asked him. So Ephraim Mamou has impressed me as being all African all of the time. His dress, his mannerisms, his singing, his language, everything. He tried to not let the whole European culture overrun the African culture. Harriet Tubman, this is where I tell the children about slavery in the U.S., the Africans being enslaved and how they fought to escape, what they call the Underground Railroad, which she was the leader of. They got so many people figuring out. Samora Machel, Mozambique, a young, strong leader. He was a nurse by training, but he was able to struggle against the Portuguese until, unfortunately, he was also killed in a plane accident, which I'm pretty sure was orchestrated. Nanny of Jamaica. The Jamaicans have what they call the Maroons, which are the people who leave the plantations, slave plantations, in this case the British, go into the mountains and form their own communities. Well, she was a Maroon queen who had led almost a secessionist movement. She was so strong that the British eventually had to give her her own section of the island. So I haven't been to Jamaica, but they say, they still have the Nanny town or Nanny section there today. They think she was Nana here in Ghana. And Nanny is how she goes down in history of Jamaica. So there's a lot of people in Jamaica, Chermatang, Champong, Kudro, these kind of names that are predominant still in Jamaica today, which just shows obviously a direct link from where they came from. Haile Selassie, Rastafari, also, of course, he struggled against the Italians also, and did a lot in terms of just modernizing the country. He is Rastafari, which he was born Tafari Makonnen. So he's Ras, which is kind of like Prince Tafari Makonnen. He changed to Haile Selassie because when they become king, they use their Gaya's name. Pianki, just another one of the African leaders. He founded the 25th dynasty in Egypt. A dynasty is basically a group of families or a group that rule for a certain period of time. In ancient Egypt. 25th dynasty was the last truly black dynasty of ancient Egypt. And you see that was 714 BC. And as you see down here,
Wow.
Started a lot earlier than that. Shaka, the great Zulu king, was able to consolidate power there in South Africa, providing some level of insulation from exterior.
Okay.
Fannie Lou Hamer, this is where I let the children know that even when I was a young child in the U.S., we were not allowed to vote, at least not in reality. On paper we were, but in reality you weren't.
Oh.
You know, they may tell you how many flowers are on that tree. You give the wrong number, then they say you can't vote. So they had all of these literacy tests and all these fake tests, but basically making it difficult, almost impossible for blacks to vote. And of course, she was a voting rights advocate. They jailed her, beat her, tortured her, but they couldn't stop her. Coming out of Nyoche up there and today's Togo, Togbe Street, the first was the Anglo chief who brought a lot of them out of there down to this area. There's a whole lot of stories about how he did that, and a lot of myths and legends about how they escaped Kole, the wicked king who was back there in those days. Taki Tawiya from the Gas, so that's an airway, this is a Ga. Turn of last century, and they're coming into the colonial process. Of course, he was trying to maintain sovereignty for the group there. When we get on down here, so this is now, these four right here is four that I think are very important, kind of like on the front of the wall. Menes or Narmer is what we really should call him, 3000 BC. This was very important for the students to see, because if you look at this face, we know it's his actual face, the big carving somewhere in the, I think British Museum or one of the museums, is still there. And so we know this is how he really looked. This is the first pharaoh of the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, or ancient Kemet. So all of the children, all of the teachers, all of the preachers, everyone who comes through here has seen several movies, you know, in ancient Egypt. They have these European or Arab-looking pharaohs sitting in the, but look, but that's Hollywood, but we actually know what they look like. And if this is not an African, then there's no such thing as an African. I mean, it's clear.
Wow.
Where he comes from. So we don't have to guess, we know.
Yeah.
Cabral, one of the great leaders, Guinea-Bissau, down, of course, anti-colonial struggle during Nkrumah's time, and through there, he was able, more than any of the other leaders, I think, to understand fully, culturally, strategically, intellectually, what had to happen to break the colonial system. Of course, they were able to kick the Portuguese out, which basically collapsed the Portuguese Empire and caused a revolution there in Portugal. But he's a writer, thinker, books like Return to the Source, Unity and Struggle, the rest. Imhotep, another important one, again in ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, not the first dynasty, now you're down to the third dynasty, 2600 BC, which is about, 500 or 600 years later from there. Imhotep was the first multiple genius. He was the first medical doctor, which is something that people seem not to believe until they go off and get their own proof. Very, very influential. Astronomer, scribe. But when you take your Hippocratic oath, if you look inside, the Greeks mention Asclepius, and then the Greeks also tell you that Asclepius is the name they use for Imhotep. So even the doctors aren't sure that they took their oath to practice up to the level of this African who started the whole thing. And the documentation is there, the surgeries he did, all of the things. Wow. You can find it. Okay, well, that's a good question. Samuel Maharero, unfortunately, the Germans practiced their genocidal techniques on the Herero and the Nama people there in Namibia, because if you do a little research, you find that a lot of the generals, Van Trothen, a lot of the other ones, a lot of the generals and the leaders of this massacre, this genocide that took place against the Maharero people, also their sons, nephews, and proteges were the leaders in the German army in World War II when they committed genocide against the Jews, Gypsies, and others. So this was a black, and Maharero, of course, being the leader, did everything humanly possible to slow or stop this genocide of his people. Oliver Tambo of South Africa, also kicked out in exile for up to 3 decades, organizing the armed movement, the weaponry, the money, finance, propaganda, and everything else. in favor of the anti-apartheid forces in South Africa. Agostinho Neto, medical doctor, poet, and all the rest, but he's also, of course, the leader of the anti-colonial struggle against the Portuguese and there in Angola, and of course their first president. Zabeth of Haiti, this is a young girl who was born on the Haitian plantations, but she ran away from those French plantations every time she got a chance, beginning at 9 years old. And so I'd like the children to understand how many times she ran away until she finally bled to death on one of her last escapes. But the perseverance of this child over the years to leave, get caught, be brutalized, leave again, caught, tortured, branded, run again, no matter what they did to her, she could not be, her spirit couldn't be broken, and she would never stop trying to run away. Till, of course.
So the lesson there is she refused to be a captive.
She just refused.
She wanted to be an independent person.
And knew it at 9 years old.
9 years old. Wow.
Well, the other ones were, you know. Okay, Baby Ray. Now this one, Baby Ray was of Temne people in Sierra Leone. One of the favorite things that the British did in Kenya and other places of their colonies, they needed to make money to run the colonial order. So what they would do is they would say, okay, you Africans have been living in this area with the huts for 1,000 years or however long. We're going to put a tax on your hut. And with that tax, the money we make from the tax is what we'll use to run our affairs and raise money and do whatever we do. And so if you can imagine that someone's been living in a hut for 10 generations or huts in that area, why would they pay a tax on the hut to somebody who just shows up? But what they did is through force, they said, if you don't pay the tax on the hut, then you're in violation of your tax, you're arreared on your taxes, and so you can be harassed, killed, jailed, or what have you. So when Baby Ray understood what arrangement that was, he said it's ridiculous. So he went to war with the British, and they call them the Hut Tax Wars. And he was successful to some extent, but almost everywhere you're finding the difference in weaponry. They had the machine gun or the Maxim gun or whatever, and we didn't. And so even with a lot of these wars, we won so much, if you can imagine, without having those things. I mean, that was just determination, perseverance, strategy. But at the end, you know, when those bullets keep coming,
you can't survive it.
you have to change course. So, yeah. But that's a great Baby Ray. Felix Mumi, he's here not because he was known as a great leader so much. He was an up-and-coming young leader in Cameroon. I have him here because he came to Geneva, Switzerland, to do some negotiations on behalf of his country, you know, thinking that he's in these neutral places. They tell us they're so neutral and free, but they poisoned him at dinner with thallium. And it became a scandal because they put just enough, originally they put enough thallium in his drink to where he was supposed to die a few weeks later when he got back home. But they panicked because he didn't take it, and they put some in a different drink, overdose. He drank it before he left the dinner, and it killed him that night. So it was clear to everyone that the man had been poisoned. The whole point I'm really making to the children there is you have to be careful wherever you are, even in these so-called neutral, lovely places where they've got beautiful Swiss Alps and the rest. Sekohune, South Africa, in the Limpopo area, this is a man who, at the Pedi PDI ethnic group, struggle against the Boers. Boers are the Dutch, of course, who took over in South Africa, started the apartheid regime. We call them Afrikaners. But they're in this area, Sekohune struggled against the Boers, and then with some success had to come back, struggle against the British, of course, with some success, and he's just known as one of their most effective and long-term freedom fighters. Nahanda of Zimbabwe, she was a spirit leader of what they call the Shimarangas, a war of resistance against the British. So when they finally captured her, they didn't send her into exile. They put a rope around her neck and hung her because they knew or afraid of her powers would still be operating somewhere if she was still alive.
Wow.
The great Nahanda. And of course the second Shimaranga was the second war with Mugabe and the rest against the same regime much later. Martin Luther King Jr., you see what I was saying about these things got chipped away pretty good here. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, of the U.S., most people know him as a human rights advocate. He, we think, was really assassinated once again by the U.S. government because in his case, he was not just talking about black people's rights in terms of marching and integration. He started talking about the human rights of all people, and also anti-war campaign that he was putting on against the war in Vietnam and the rest. So they considered him to be outside of his realm of expertise, dabbling into national affairs that he had no business, and that's when they shut him down. Hatshepsut of Kemet. This is a one of the female pharaohs of ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet.
Female
Pharaohs.
Okay.
A lot of people don't realize there were African female pharaohs of these great dynasties also. Kaliderat and Nubia. Once again, we're going back to that lower Nile Valley, Nubia, Kush, Sudan area, South Egypt. By now, getting to the 600s, 700s, now the Arabs have taken over in Egypt. Now, after all of this time down here, the Arabs weren't in Egypt, certainly not in charge. So all of these Africans, but today if you go, or if you watch a football game, you'll have the impression that these Arabs have been there since the beginning. So now you'll see pictures of Arabic-looking people building pyramids and doing all of these wonderful things thousands of years before they ever showed up on the scene. But by now in 600, 640, they were now in charge, dominant force in Egypt. So what did they do? They tried to do what the Romans did back here with the Meneranes. They started moving south. Unfortunately, even though she was gone and several hundred years had passed, there was another group led by Kaliderat who, in their army, who stopped the Arab southern onrush. And so they fought the Arabs to a standstill and forced them into a treaty called a Baqt, B-A-Q-T, and that treaty lasted 700 years. 700 years. So you'll look at a lot of history, you'll notice you don't see a whole lot of Arabic incursion down into parts of Africa that we see now. A lot of that was stopped at this point.
Oh,
so you're talking 641, another 700 years before they began to take over, get in a more dominant position. The greatest boxer of all time, Muhammad Ali, although a lot of people have other people, but he's our favorite. Plus, he's not here on the wall just for that. He's here also for the human rights stance that he took against wars and other things. And he was just a strong black voice in the United States of America for us to come up. And would not sell out for money. So they took his title away from him, 3 years, all of the money he lost and everything because he just refused to go along with the foreign policy of the United States. In this case, also Vietnam. So sometimes you can even hear Martin Luther King in his speeches talking about Muhammad Ali foregoing all of that money and all of that fame just to take a stand not to go to war. The same war that Martin Luther King was encouraging people not to enter. Lat Dior Diop of Senegal, he's one of the great kings of Damal, they call him, of a place called Cayor in Senegal. It's still there today. That area the French were trying to overrun because they wanted to run their railroad through there and do some other things. Well, he and his family and his sons fought the French, died in battle, but he's one of the great resistance leaders that is still legendary in Senegal, struggling against the French. Antonio Maceo, a lot of people, once again, don't realize how many black Africans are in Cuba. Well, the Cubans, of course, had a war of liberation against the Spanish. And one of the two main generals who led the war was this African named Antonio Maceo. They call him the Bronze Titan. And I'm told that if you go to Cuba today, you'll still see a lot of reverence paid to him. Patrice Lumumba, a young leader out of the Congo. Of course, he didn't live long, but this gives me a chance to talk to the students about the 10 million Africans who lost their lives in the rubber trade. You see, King Leopold, when they did the Berlin Conference, when they split up all the African countries, Congo was left as a private enclave of King Leopold of Belgium. And 10 million, and of course it was full of rubber. And that was a time when rubber was becoming popular around the world, cars, bicycles, and the rest. So he was able to make his fortune off the Africans working in their own country on the rubber trees and plantations. Up to 10 million died. If you don't bring back enough rubber, they would take your wife, send you off. When you come back, if you don't bring back enough rubber, they would chop off her hand. send you back. If you don't bring enough the next time, they may take your daughter and cut her arm off. So you'll go back, you'll see all of these pictures of people holding up the arms and hands of Africans whose father, brother, or whatever did not bring enough rubber back to the European to sell and become rich on the international markets. Elijah Muhammad of the United States, he started the Nation of Islam, which was a black Muslim movement in the United States. He's on the wall mainly because of the things that he was able to organize and produce for black people as a group in terms of the businesses, in terms of the schools, the restaurants, transport company, bank, all of these kind of things. And it's the closest thing we've had to a functioning nation within the nation as long as we've been in America. So there he is. This one, Ida B. Wells, because all the children think of Michael Jackson, but she was an anti-lynching crusader. Lynching is when they would take African men and women and hang them by the neck as public spectacles. Some cases, most cases, they were using it just as almost like an entertainment. So it's on the weekend, there's going to be a lynching, so there's food, there's entertainment, there's music. We have hundreds of pictures of the whites all smiling and laughing and thumbs up, with maybe 2 African women who have been char burned and hanging from trees behind them. And that's what they would do for picnics and entertainment on the weekend. Well, she was an anti-lynching crusader, very brave journalist. And I was reading something not so long ago. A lot of the people, African people, black people, they lynched in America at the time, it's not because they broke any laws, it's not because they offended any particular whites, and it's because they were successful business owners. They said something up to 80% of the people who were actually lynched were business owners, because they were sending the message to blacks in the US, if you dare try to make yourself independently, not even wealthy, just independent of us, and set a precedent or a model for other people to start all their businesses to be independent of us and our economy, then this what could happen to you. So wow. This was a big, big struggle that we've had to overcome there in the Western Hemisphere. John Okello of Zanzibar. This is the case where the Omani Arabs were in charge of Zanzibar for a long, long time. And of course, mistreating, dominating, exploiting, and abusing the black African natives of the land. So finally, the Afro-Shiraza Party under Okello rose up and had a very bloody revolution, but it's what they had to do to free themselves from that domination of this foreign entity. Zanzibar later connected with Tanganyika to become Tanzania. You see the Babu and the rest of these politicians during the time pulling that together. Fela Kuti in Nigeria, the great resistance musician. So no matter what anyone said or did to Fela, he would just come out with a song that was even more insulting than the last one. So the man was brave if nothing else, and of course he's a talented musician. Zumbia, Brazil. And this is another important one. You see, when the Portuguese brought the Africans to Brazil to work on the slave plantations, they also had their Maroons who had escaped to the mountains, build their own civilizations. Those civilizations, towns, cities, in the mountains of Brazil were called quilombos. And the longest running, most successful quilombo we think we know about is called Palmares in the mountains of Brazil. I've been not all the way to Palmares, I got kind of close in the mountains of Brazil, and there's still people there today who practice some very, very rich African culture, and even segment pieces of the language, the Yoruba and other languages that you can still hear today in those mountains. B.B. King was the greatest blues man of all time, and my daddy's favorite. Walter Rodney, I think I will stop here for a second. Walter Rodney was just a brilliant, brilliant African. He wrote a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which I think should be required reading for everyone. Listening to Walter Rodney speak, you would think he's reading. You wouldn't imagine it's extemporaneous of the brilliance of this man. In Guyana, of course, he was, not of course, but he was also killed in Guyana, mainly for his political orientation. But I urge everyone to read that, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Queen Amina, one of the great Hausa queens in northern Nigeria, controlled huge swaths of territory. Eduardo Manlani, it's getting worse. Eduardo Manlani was a founder of the resistance movement called Frelimo against the Portuguese there in Mozambique. Garrett Morgan, African-American inventor. He invented the traffic light, traffic signal. He also invented the gas mask that went, that
so
they used in the
traffic
fire.
light and gas mask was a black man.
It was both invented by this black man. Yeah. Frantz Fanon, the great psychiatrist, thinker there of Martinique, who wrote The Wretched of the Earth and some other books. John Chilembwe of Malawi, studied religion in the U.S., came back but still had to go to war against the British in Malawi. Sekou Touré, a lot of people will know Sekou Touré.
Yes,
he's the
Sekou
one,
Touré.
yeah, from Guinea, who brought Nkrumah in as a co-president. And also, I think I'll say a little more about him. You know, when the French, B.B. King was the greatest blues man of all time, and my daddy's favorite, Walter Rodney. I think I will stop here for a second. Walter Rodney was just a brilliant African. He wrote a book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which I think should be required reading for everyone. Listening to Walter Rodney speak, you would think he's reading. You wouldn't imagine it's extemporaneous, the brilliance of this man. In Guyana, of course, he was, not of course, but he was also killed in Guyana, mainly for his political orientation. But I urge everyone to read that, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Queen Amina, one of the great Hausa queens in northern Nigeria, controlled huge swaths of territory. Eduardo Manlani, it's getting worse. Eduardo Manlani was a founder of the resistance movement called Frelimo against the Portuguese there in Mozambique. Garrett Morgan, African-American inventor. He invented the traffic light, traffic signal. He also invented the gas mask that went, that
so
they used in the fire.
traffic light and gas mask was a black man.
It was both invented by this black man. Yeah. Frantz Fanon, the great psychiatrist, thinker there of Martinique, who wrote The Wretched of the Earth and some other books. John Chilembwe of Malawi, studied religion in the U.S., came back but still had to go to war against the British in Malawi. Sekou Touré, a lot of people will know Sekou Touré.
Yes,
he's the
Sekou
one,
Touré.
yeah, from Guinea, who brought Nkrumah in as a co-president. And also, I think I'll say a little more about him. You know, when the French came, at the colonial times, they told all of the French-speaking African countries, you can be in partnership, kind of stay in the French community, and all of them agreed, except for Guinea and Mali. And so Sekou Touré was one of the strongest ones that say, listen, we don't need anything you French have, forget it. So the French came and destroyed as best they could all the infrastructure in the country. I mean, they were pouring cement down the pipes and doing everything they could, lights, electricity, ripping everything out. But he said, you go ahead and do what you want, just leave. And of course, was able to rebuild Guinea. But they've never really forgiven Sekou Touré or Guinea for that act. Ami Sisser, one of the great founders of a thing called Negritude, which was the African literary movement, poet, anti-colonial thinker, really led a lot of the French West African and French Caribbean community. Samori Touré of Guinea, of course, he had the most successful anti-French resistance movement all through West Africa, also related to Sekou Touré. Teachers, scholars, activists, John Henry Clark, Josephine Yankinen, together, I don't know how many dozens of books they've written and edited, are always available for us to teach. Advisors of Malcolm X, advisors of intellectuals, activists all through the last century of American struggle.
Did you put it on record?
You can put it on record,
About Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I'll give you the BBC litmus test.
Okay.
BBC raises you up too high, I hesitate.
Okay.
So I'll just leave it there. But Nelson Mandela, of course, 27 years, Robben Island, and he was one of our great leaders too. But we got to give the sister credit because she's been demonized.
Schools, children, what message do you have for them? Because this is a rich history of the black people that could encourage any of our children to rise up, to take up their leadership position and raise up their mantle and fight for their right and also achieve greatness and influence their society. What do you have to say?
I think what we're really trying to get across to the youth is that even though you see Africans in a bad situation today, or at least in what appears to be a bad situation, we have the potential and we have everything we need to reverse it. And we cannot allow what's going on today to kill our confidence. And because we look outside at the media and we look and everyone is oriented to outside. But sometimes you have to know, if you know that you're the first doctor, if you know that you invented the first major civilization, if you know that you invented things and had great thinkers and warriors and fighters and state nation organizers, then you know you can do it again. It's no mystery. So do it, know you can do it, build your confidence, and then move ahead, knowing that the rest of the world does not hold any superior thinking or even leadership than you have here. We went through a temporary setback and we have the strength to overcome it. That's what I would like the youth to understand about themselves.
Well, viewers, you have seen the journey we went through in this history on the African Ancestral War. There are so many great achievers within the Black community. I just want to encourage you. We have all been empowered by God to achieve greatness. Do not let the color of your skin limit you. You can grow to any height. I just want to challenge you, whether black, white, brown, whoever you are, know that there is greatness in you. And so don't let anything stop you from achieving your very best in the world. Be an influencer. Do something that will change your generation and generations to come so that you can always be remembered. Thank you for being with us on this journey, and tune in to our next episode that we will be coming up with more stories that will help you to know that there is rich history in Africa and in Ghana. Now we are in Ghana, we'll continue to other African countries to tell you more about the rich information that we have in Africa and the rich potential in Africa. See ya.